I was so honored to see the former president of my country, Estonia, Kersti Kaljulaid, sharing earlier, and I really like what she said. When you have a country where both the prime minister and president are both women, little girls grow up thinking that the sky is the limit. My daughter, Eve, is an Estonian girl. She's 9 years old, and I was so proud when she told me she wanted to be president. When I asked her, what do you want to be when you grow up? What she told me, though, was that she wanted to be president of the USA and not Estonia. I haven't explained geopolitics to her yet, and I don't think she understands that she's not even an American citizen, but I'll wait for her to get a little bit older before I explain that to her. In the meanwhile, I'm really inspired to see the former president of my country, Kersti Kaljulaid, on stage here. What I'm going to talk about today has to do with the definition of female leadership. We toss around that word a lot, but exactly what is it? And is it a superpower today? So I want to give you guys a quick survey. Look at this list of character traits and rate yourself on a scale of, well, which do you think are the top 10 traits that you would use to describe yourself or your friends would use to describe you? Make a quick list, because I'm going to show you what this means in a moment. Now, what you're seeing here are common character traits of people who are leaders, people who are top performers in companies. Which do you feel you have as your top 10? I'm going to give you 30 seconds. You can write it down on your cell phone or a piece of paper or just memorize it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the traits which are traditionally feminine and the traits which are traditionally masculine. Give yourself 1 point if you picked a masculine trait, and give yourself 5 points if you picked a feminine trait. Okay? So we're going to come to that in a moment. But before we go into what those traits mean, I want to give you another test, just so we have a little bit of fun here. I want you to look at your right hand and observe, is your ring finger longer than your index finger? So this is the ring finger, this is your index finger. Okay, now what you will notice is that men, typically, the ring finger is longer than the index finger. Now, it turns out that there is a science here, and your finger length ratio actually correlates with masculine or feminine trait ability. And it's interesting, there are so many studies on this, but it has to do with testosterone levels in the womb before you were born. So if you have higher levels of testosterone in the womb, your ring finger tends to be longer. If you have lower levels of testosterone in the womb, you're more likely a woman, and your ring finger tends to be shorter. But here's what these studies actually show. And the studies are really interesting because it shows that there is a biological dimension to masculine or feminine traits. It's not just how our parents raised us. For example, if you tend to have more prenatal testosterone level, as a male, the higher your ratio of finger, the higher your testosterone, the more respectful and agreeable you are to women. So this is really interesting. Men with higher levels of feminine energy actually argue with women more. Men with higher levels of testosterone actually are more agreeable to women. This was a study done at McGill University, so that's one. Another really interesting thing has to do with the face. You have a more masculine face if this finger is longer, if your ring finger is longer. Another study, which is really interesting, done in Munich, showed that you are more aggressive if you have your ring finger longer. So if you're a male and this finger is longer, you are actually more aggressive and competitive. So in this study at Munich University, they had men who were divided into two groups, those with higher prenatal testosterone and lower prenatal testosterone, and they had to compete in a game, and the reward was points akin to money. The ones who made more money was the ones who were more aggressive, which again shows that in our global dynamic, this behavior could be one of the reasons why men traditionally earn more, that aggressive behavior. So again, there's a biological basis to masculine and feminine energy, but there's also a nurture basis. If you're a woman and your mother told you, good girls speak softly, this may prevent you growing up from really sharing your opinions in a boardroom. If you're a man and your father told you, men take action, don't think, just act, this may actually make you speak up more in a boardroom, even if you have lousier ideas and less information. So our genetics as well as our upbringing influence masculine and feminine tendency. Now let's go back to those traits, okay? The traits earlier that I asked you to rate. Now, these are the ones which are typically classified as feminine. So the ones in the darker blue: flexible, expressive, nurturing, sensitive, trusting, empathetic, free-spirited, creative, gentle, intuitive, tend to be traits which are typically feminine. The ones in the lighter blue tend to be more masculine. Now, this is from a book called The Bingo Theory by Mimi Icon, who's a writer who's of American Azerbaijani descent. And what she says is, if you score below 30, then you are more masculine in your traits. If you score above 30, you are more feminine in your traits. Okay, so you can do this assessment yourself. But let's look at, what does this mean? If you're more feminine in your trait, what does this mean? And does this give you an advantage or a disadvantage in today's world? So the important thing to understand is this. If you're more feminine in your traits, feminine strength people doubt their abilities, while masculine strength people think they can rule the world. Somewhere in between poor me, I'm useless, and check me out, I'm fabulous, is a great place to be. What this means is the balance is really a great place. Women typically in the workplace tend to doubt themselves. I'm sure you've heard of the phrase imposter syndrome. This tends to afflict women more than men. Men tend to be overconfident. They think they've figured it out. But this can often be overconfidence. So what, in an ideal world, in an ideal workplace, we want to balance these traits. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to balance these traits within yourself, but it is evidence that if we have mixed boardrooms or governments which have a better ratio of men and women, healthier decisions could be made. Women, according to Iman Obu, who is a Moroccan-American writer who wrote a book called The Glass Ledge, she said, although women's oppression is nothing new, we are our own worst enemy when we insist on our powerlessness. So there's often a tendency among women to believe that the feminine trait in the corporate world is actually weaker. But there's a lot of new science emerging on how companies work. And this new science is actually suggesting that feminine traits can be a superpower. And I want to share some of this science with you. The advantages of feminine leadership. So first we got to understand that the modern corporate world is a vestige of the old American military-industrial structure. After World War II, the American corporation, when it designed its parameters of leadership, followed the American military. Now, the US occupied Germany, they occupied Japan, and so the American corporate culture also influenced German and Japanese centers of industry. And thus, we still follow some of these hierarchical structures today. It was built by men and designed for men. But slowly, we're beginning to see evidence that there are other ways of leading a company from a feminine perspective that can create advantages. So let's look at the quality of nurturing, okay? Nurturing, a traditionally powerful feminine advantage because mothers nurture. So there were studies done to identify what makes people effective at work. And it turns out in this book, Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker, our brains operate better when we are happy. We see this evidence everywhere. Happy salespeople are 56% better at closing a sale. Students who are happier do better at exams. Doctors who are happier are 19% better at diagnoses. Nurturing creates elevated levels of happiness, which actually improve performance. For example, in this study on the doctors, do you know how they improve a doctor's accuracy by 19%? Before the doctor was sent into the examination room, the doctor was given a lollipop. That's it, a lollipop, which created a smile on their face. It turned out the doctors who were given a lollipop, and they didn't even like suck on the lollipop, this wasn't the sugar, they were 19% better at diagnoses. These little acts of nurturing can create a huge productivity aspect. So, what generates happiness in addition to nurturing? Happiness is often created by community. And we know that a feminine trait is creating community, is bringing people together. The Very Happy People study by Ed Diener at Harvard University showed that only one thing truly correlates to happiness, and that one thing is strength of social relationships. The more connected you are to other people, the more connected you are to your family, to your community, the happier you are. And the happier you are, the better you perform. This is some evidence that the feminine dynamic in the workplace, which nurtures, which creates community, can be highly advantaged because it increases happiness levels and thus productivity goes up. Now, there's another study which I found really interesting. So this study has to do with what is called social connectivity score. So have you guys ever noticed that there are certain people in your organizations who are really friendly? If they're going up for a cup of coffee, they will say, hey, can I get you a cup of coffee? They will remember your birthday and bring you a card on your birthday. They might even bring a birthday cake to the office. This is called high social connectivity score. And it's typically the people who are kindest, most caring, and most nurturing. And they typically tend to be women who display these traits. It turns out that if you look at an organization, the people in the top 25% of social connectivity score will have a 40% higher odds of getting a raise or a promotion in the next 2 years. This was again a study done by Harvard, which speaks to the idea that nurturing, community, caring deeply about the people around you has huge economic benefits, as well as salary advantages. Now let's look at another quality of feminine, empathy. Women tend to be more empathetic than men. There could be an evolutionary reason for this because traditionally women raised the children while men were out hunting. And if you're raising a child, you've got to be very acutely aware of what is going on in the emotional state of that child. But it turns out that empathy in the workplace is also a really good idea. Gallup did a study of 10 million employees. And these employees had to answer yes or no to various questions. It turned out that there was one question that if the employee said yes, this correlated with higher productivity, it correlated with more revenue per employee, it correlated with people staying in the workplace more, and the question was this: my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. Empathy, caring, nurturing. Again, we see evidence that these feminine qualities have a huge advantage in retention, in productivity, in revenue per employee, whether this is a corporation or a government. Now let's look at another feminine trait, free-spirited. Free-spirited means you are more expressive, you are more flexible, and one of the things about free-spirited that can arise in a workplace is that you are friendlier. You're friendlier because you're not bound by the rigid hierarchical controls of a company. You might be more open to chatting with someone or more open to going for lunch with someone above or below you. All of this can lead to friendship. And there are correlations between friendship and productivity. So if you speak to HR directors, one of the things that HR directors are constantly trying to improve is a metric called engagement. How engaged are people at their work? It turns out that globally, based on a Gallup study, 83% of employees are not engaged in their work, which means only around 17% of people globally actually deeply care about the work they do. But there's this one thing that increases engagement, and it turns out that engagement correlates with, do you have a best friend at work? So if we create workplaces where people are closer connected, and people can say that they have a best friend at work, their engagement goes up 700%. 700%. So it turned out friendship in a workplace is a huge, huge, huge power. Now, let's go on to something a little bit more mysterious that science is just studying and beginning to show some interesting evidence for: intuition. I'm sure you've heard of the phrase woman's intuition. I bet many of you here, as women who are mothers, have experienced moments where you just know that your child is having difficulty. I saw this in the mother of my children. She would know if my son was having difficulty in school. She'd just know that he was having an off day. Intuition, it turned out, is real. And we are studying it now across the world, and interesting patterns are emerging. So Steve Jobs famously spoke about intuition in his Stanford commencement address. He said, "Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become." Steve Jobs is rated the #1 CEO of the last 100 years. But is there evidence that intuition actually helps a CEO? And that evidence is now emerging. Professor John Mihalaski of Newark College of Engineering did a study on intuition and CEOs. So this is really interesting. You are shown 5 cards. One has a square, one has a triangle, one has water, one has a circle, and you have to guess what is on the card. Now, your odds of guessing correctly with 5 cards is approximately 20%. But certain people who were highly intuitive were able to guess at 23 or 25 or 27%. What Professor Mihalaski found is that the more intuitive you are, so the study was done on CEOs, it correlated directly with profitability of your company. In short, even though we cannot explain intuition, there's something going on where if you can guess more accurately, in short, you're more intuitive, you're making better decisions and profitability is going up. Since intuition, it doesn't mean that men don't have intuition, but since intuition is primarily a female superpower, could it mean that women are better at somehow making the right guesses? And now we come to sensitivity and gentleness. Sensitivity and gentleness. And this study was really interesting. So this is an extract from a book called Exponential Organizations by Salim Ismail. Salim Ismail is actually speaking here at the World Government Summit. And as I was reading his book, this paragraph stood out. We often think that the best employees are people who have degrees from Stanford or Harvard. So Google did a study. And what Google found is that its best employees were not Ivy League students, but rather young people who had experienced a big loss in their lives and had been able to transform that experience into growth. According to Google, deep personal loss has resulted in employees who are more humble and open to listening and learning. Sensitivity, gentleness, all of these relate to listening. All of these relate to humbleness and humility. And it turns out that these are the qualities that make the best employees at Google. I would argue that these are also qualities that are more associated with the feminine. Men tend to talk louder and tend to talk faster with less data because of this overconfidence. Women tend to listen more and tend to take more democratic decisions by rallying in other members of the team. This isn't an opinion, this is actually fact based on behavioral models of how men and women lead. And this, I believe, is another female superpower. Now, the final one is called expressive. It's expressing how you feel, expressing joy, expressing vulnerability. And this study, I probably found the most interesting. I learned about this when I was interviewing the Harvard researcher Sean Aker. Now, I don't have time to play the video, it's a 2-minute video, but this is basically what Sean Aker found. He found that there's one thing that you can bring to your organization that completely transforms your culture, increases productivity, increases profitability, and causes your people to stay longer. And he calls it the 2-minute exercise. So, he went to a company that was doing $650 million in revenue, and he made them do this exercise every day, and the results were so good. This company that was stagnating went from 650 to 950 million in revenue in 18 months. Google flew down to see what they were doing because the entire culture transformed. The number of people applying to the company went up 270%. And this exercise only took 2 minutes a day per employee. Now, here was the exercise. It was expressing thanks. Every employee had to take out their phone, and when they started their day, say at 9 a.m., before they did anything else, they would set a timer on their phone for 2 minutes and then write an email expressing thank you and gratitude to a fellow employee. Sean Aker said specifically 2 minutes. Don't make it shorter because it's not enough time. Don't make it longer because it's taking up too much time. 2 minutes. This single exercise transformed this entire company. It's called 2-minute appreciation. And this is something that I believe is again, a trait that comes naturally to women. Now, finally, I want to leave you with one piece of advice. In the world today, in government, there is 3 men for every woman. And so the changes are going to come over the next 50 to 150 years. But one of the things I believe that women can do to help create this change is to not feel like they have to force themselves to act like men, but rather to embrace these feminine superpowers and support other women. If I can give you one piece of homework, there is a Pixar animated film called Pearl, which is about this exact topic, about a woman who joins a male workforce and at first tries to be one of the guys. And then when the second woman joins, she sees how that second woman is being left out. And she decides to go back to a feminine quality and instead work with that second woman to change the dynamic of the office. It is hilarious, it is funny, and it has a very powerful message. If you get a chance, Google Pearl. It's an 8-minute short animated film. It's on YouTube, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. So thank you. And I want to share with you an exercise from the book The Glass Ledge by Iman Abor, which is an exercise she suggests for women to reflect on the last time you truly felt powerful and how to create greater confidence in your power. Think about the situation. Think about what power felt like in your body. Think about what emotions were at the top of your mind. And then think about when you were feeling the opposite of that, so you understand the difference, and write it down in your journal. Reread this and do this exercise every day so that you learn to embody and remember those moments where, as a woman, you felt powerful. I also strongly recommend the book by Iman Abu, The Glass Ledge. Thank you so much.